Well, welcome everyone to the latest edition of HR Tech Chat. Is it edition or episode? Well, edition works, I guess. Um, with us today, we have James La Brash, who is founding managing director of InFlight. Welcome. Thank you for joining us. Yeah,
Thank you for having me.
absolutely. Yeah. And, you know, we were talking the other day on the back channel around just like around what InFlight does, and we started talking about as these conversations go around all sorts of possibilities around HCM, and then we started talking about marketing too, and we thought, this might be a really good basis for a discussion on HR Tech Chat. So here we are. Um, let me just sort of lay the groundwork here for or just kind of give our viewers their bearings here. What we sort of landed on is this idea that there's an up and I've you and I we've both seen this in the sort of the meta discussion out there in the chatter out there in the space, right? This idea that there's some ways for marketing and HCM to really to collaborate or learn from each other in this space, and some of it might revolve around analytics. And let me just share another area where I've seen this discussion. When we talk about HCM, obviously we're talking about HR, all of it, the whole thing, HR, learning, payroll, talent acquisition, and a few other things. I mean, I've seen in talent acquisition the idea that candidate relationship management should be modeled after customer relationship management. We've seen this idea out there, but we were thinking about analytics and marketing and all this. So what's your take on all that?
How long do we have? Uh, so um,
A
I
half
guess
hour.
the thing that I've noticed happening in the last few years, and it's accelerating, is the I guess it started with kind of on the TA side with the development and kind of the emergence of employer brand as a concept, and some organizations, I think by default, TA owns employer brand. Some organizations, though, uh, started to realize that, well, maybe because marketing owns the outward facing image, and when you're reaching out to candidates, that is outward facing. And so should marketing have at least a seat at the table when it comes to employer brand, or are they doing their thing, for kind of in isolation, and TA is then taking maybe some of their design and visual cues, but otherwise owning completely the employer brand without further marketing involvement. And so that conversation, I think, has been happening at a lot of organizations, including some of our customers. And there's just some interesting things to learn and to infer there. And so it's progressed, I think, now as we're talking about employer brand being not just for the purposes of attracting new talent, but kind of for strengthening your ties with current employees, and retention and all of those other goals. What then should the relationship be between TA, marketing, HCM, and IT? Because at the end of the day, at least a lot of the visual aspects of employer brand need to get implemented somewhere in the systems that folks use day in, day out. So kind of that really the interesting trinity, right, that's forming between marketing, IT, and HCM, is one that was really not present just a few years ago, but which is, I think, by the cues that we're seeing, gaining some steam.
That's interesting. Um, could you get into that a little bit more around how does that, because I've heard the same thing, this idea that HCM marketing and IT are beginning to sort of align in in terms of in the ways that you mentioned. So I want to throw a couple other ideas out there too. One is we hear about employer brand, and then we talk about the company brand or the consumer brand, or whatever the brand of the thing that the company is selling, right? Um, is there more than one brand, or are we really talking? Are we sort of artificially creating partitions here? Are these just two expressions of the same brand? Like, is brand just brand? Is it the entire thing? That's a I don't know the answer to this.
I don't either, and and I would say I'm dangerously unqualified to speak to speak on the subject, but I think we can we can agree that it all starts somewhere, right? It's and this concept of um, you and it's been expressed in different ways, culture, credo, whatever. But it's the nut of it is, hey, what are you all about? And I think that yeah, there are different expressions of that depending on what you're trying to communicate. But those are the headwaters, right? What are you all about? What are you all about in terms of the product that you make? What do you care about? And that gets reflected then kind of individually for in the stories that you're trying to tell. Are you trying to tell that story as it relates to your product, or are you trying to tell that story as it relates to what it's like to work there? But
It,
it all has kind of a common root.
is it being communicated centrally from a central location, or are we equipping our employees to be expressions of the brand?
Well, I think that's where that collaboration
Mm.
has between HCM and marketing has so much potential,
Mm.
right? Because you don't want those things working in opposition, and certainly there's efficiency to be gained by telling the different expressions of the same story as opposed to trying to tell two different stories within one organization. So yeah, I think that's the really exciting point, but exciting part rather is to have those groups working together so that what's being communicated to the outside world is really the same thing that's being communicated inside.
And that's really that's interesting, because that's almost an efficiency play for brand, isn't
Yeah,
it?
I yeah, without question. Because the if you're if you're working across purposes, of course, or even just working in silos, somewhere there's either going to be distortion of the message, or you could have probably done it more efficiently if working together. So I think that's the really exciting part of this.
Yeah. Could you get into just delve into a little bit more around IT's role? Just elaborate. What is IT's role in this? How does
Yeah,
IT play
a
in?
really good question. So I think the Um, IT is where really it's where the rubber meets the road in terms of making sure that the visual and other experience aspects of the brand you make it to the end consumers of that brand,
Okay.
be they external or internal, and so there is I think there's you kind of referred to it earlier. There's a temptation um, to look at CRM systems as an example that marketing has used and say, hey, those are working these are working great for marketing, and that technology is 10 years, arguably, maybe 5, but certainly a little bit past where candidate centric CRM technologies are at. Why don't we use that? That's a temptation, and in a lot of cases it's valid. I think there's maybe too much in our industry of let's say not a temptation, but a desire to put candidates in the same box as products, and say, selling, whether your talent acquisition is just a different form of selling. So why don't we use the same tools and the same approaches, right? If we're trying to entice somebody to take a position with us, it's sort of the same as buying some of our products or services, when really it's its own animal, and so definitely does in a lot of cases require specialized treatment. But I think there's a lot of lessons that can be learned from the experiences that marketing and e-commerce have gone through, to bring to put their best foot forward digitally, prior to this becoming such a huge requirement for TA and HCM to do. And so I think as IT is involved, because really a lot of your brand, both external and internal, is kind of about, we think of it in terms of digital real estate, right? Because it's your digital real estate says a lot about you as an organization. Just like your physical real estate used to communicate, for decades, right? You tell a lot about an organization if they have a skyscraper downtown versus they're in a strip mall somewhere. You can infer a lot about that organization. And so similarly, if you don't know a particular organization well, you can infer a ton about that organization's values, where they what they care about, based on the digital real estate that they're presenting to the world. And so, are your outward and inward facing systems, do they look more like well polished skyscraper or a strip mall? And so I think it's IT's role is really in making sure that brand is communicated through employee and candidate and consumer tools, to the best of their ability.
So IT is the caretaker of the digital real estate that communicates to the outside world and externally and internally to the existing employee population, that this is a brand that's that cares about itself, it's the equivalent of having a well manicured lawn versus something that's just unruly, like I did last year at the beginning of the grass season, where 1 week it just wasn't growing. Then I waited 1 week, there was one strong rainfall, and all of a sudden I looked like an abandoned house. It was crazy. And then my landscaper guys, they were backed up, so it looked like that for a while, because my riding lawnmower got killed by mice the summer before. So anyway, no. Sorry for that tangent, but I wish I'd had an IT team to tend to my digital real estate there, metaphorically speaking. Going back to the CRM thing, I know that was a tangent, but it's so interesting to me. You're right. When you're prospecting, because the CRM, obviously, that's where sales folks will keep track. That's where you track what's happening with the sales process. Well, while there are exceptions, for the most part, every prospect is a potential. Every prospect you want to win every prospect. You want everyone to become a new customer. But with candidate outreach, right? At the end of the day, you don't want all those job seekers. You're selecting them, right? So maybe, you know, so that's that's one big difference. And there's also a number of idiosyncrasies to the process that are different, right? And so maybe you could have, if you had a situation where you wanted to, where you were a recruiter prospecting exclusively high value passive talent, right? So you know almost with 99% certainty that if they said yes, you would definitely hire them, right? Then maybe you would want something that's very much like like a customer relationship management system for that. That's just, I'm hypothesizing there, kind of going, but. And then, so just to kind of paint the picture about what we're talking about, right? Then you would want to have marketing's input on that as well, and you would want IT involved to make sure that whatever that digital environment is, that prospective high value passive talent um, uh, potential employee is seeing is top notch.
Yeah, without question, right? And that's where that's another realm really where um, you we have now the ability to draw from the lessons learned in digital engagement, right? That was sort of I would say pioneered really, or at least really further developed in the world of e-commerce, right? We know what the playbook is for for compelling a user to perform a certain task, right? It's why you see one-click ordering, and that road towards that goal on the e-commerce side is paved, right? And there's nothing that we see when we're shopping or in the process of checking out at Amazon. Nothing we see is there by mistake. It's all been really carefully fine-tuned, over years and years, and millions of transactions to achieve that goal, right? And really pave that road. And so we can use then those same tactics, that are now really well understood, for tasks that face candidates, particularly in those hard to fill situations. If we can establish, and pave a road for very hard to fill positions, then absolutely we should do so. And like I said, the playbook is pretty well known at this point. And we can further extend that logic into the organization, so that it's not so that it's not a bait and switch situation where our candidate facing digital real estate is glorious, but then as soon as that person is hired, there are weeds growing everywhere.
Right. There needs to be sort of a let me put it differently. The organization needs to consider the employer brand from a holistic standpoint and be authentic in that expression of that employer brand. It needs to be, well, hold on. There needs to be consistency.
Consistency, I think, is a really important part of it. If you don't want to create that impression that, hey, new hire, you were just sold a bill of goods. But I think certainly the intent, that's never the intent, right? It's just a question of, where do you focus limited resources, and especially in realms where there's such scarce talent. Of course, that's going to be the first focus, but I think more and more organizations are realizing that internal facing systems require some degree of upkeep as well, and having input from marketing, I think can drive some efficiencies that make that that possible for a lower cost than doing it in a silo.
Yeah, 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 absolutely. And let's get into marketing a little bit more, because one of the things that we talked about previously was, um, just and there's a loose analogy here too. You know, the CRM systems are a little, maybe 5 to 10 years ahead of the candidate relationship management systems in terms of their sophistication, and so leaving that aside, there's a loose analogy with this idea that marketing's, uh, in terms of bleeding edge, right? So marketing has been, what I would say is 5 to 10 years ahead of HCM in terms of understanding and understanding analytics and using them and paying attention to them to quantify in as many ways possible, their impact on organizational goals, right? And and so let's talk about that a little bit, because I recall that we got into some interesting things around value. What's the value of marketing? What's the value of HCM? These sorts of things. I can tell you already have a few thoughts there.
Yeah, well, I think, part of what we were speaking about last time was really that difficulty in measuring or quantifying um, the impact of employer brand, right? How do you do that? And the conversation led to, well, hey, that's a problem that marketing has had for, since its inception, right? When you're doing um, when you are when um, you're carrying out specific marketing activities, you can measure things like, the leads that a particular campaign has generated, but how do you measure the impact of your brand? And so that's a problem. That's a problem that's fairly new to HR, but one that is not new to marketing. So I think there might be some really interesting conversations that happen within each organization as to how that might be measured, and therefore, where's the best allocation of resources.
Yeah, and I'm not sure where. I'd love to be the fly on the wall in some of those
Oh
conversations, because
yeah.
I would like to really, because I'm just sort of grasping at thin air here, in terms of what exactly would it be. But it is true that marketing, much like HCM, well, if we think about marketing, and so marketing's ultimate goal, beyond beyond you know beyond the its transcendent goal, beyond providing actionable quality leads to sales, right, which is a highly quantifiable, has a highly quantifiable aspect on the organization, the effect of the success of sales, right? But beyond that, it has sort of a transcendent goal of creating a strong, compelling brand for the organization. That's marketing's sort of, third eye goal, if you will, right?
Yes, that's right.
And then HCM, it's, has actually, an almost perfectly aligned goal of in terms of a transcendent goal of creating a really strong, compelling employer brand. And that gets us back to this question of, does an organization really have more than one brand? Is it all just the same thing? It's just aspects of it. A. B, going back to HCM, right? They also have this sort of cost set. They have a cost reduction, productivity, efficiencies type of goal, that they need to be really tight with that WFM, and the payroll system has to be good, so that they can keep those costs as low as possible, right? So each domain of the organization has two sort of totally different goals, right? To what they do. And where was I going with this? Okay, so part of it, the less, like sort of the boring stuff for each of them in a way is kind of the boring stuff, for lack of a better word. The more straightforward, less creative stuff, right, is where the organization is where they affect the general ledger in the organization. And then there's also all this other stuff that they absolutely have to do, but it's very difficult or impossible to quantify it financially. And this is where we landed last time. It was just this idea where, so how do you show leadership in your organization? Like, how do you make leadership, all stakeholders in leadership, understand and appreciate what you're doing in HCM or marketing, for that matter, when only half of what you're doing is something that shows up on the bottom, like in the general ledger for them?
Oh, that's a great question, Brent, and I wish I had the answer.
I'm excited.
I think there are a lot of folks that will turn to surveys, right? Pulse surveys and this sort of thing. Again, this is the challenge of figuring out what's the impact of measuring what's the impact of your branding activity, is it's a real problem. And so if you want to be able to demonstrate that these activities are working in some regard, then yeah, you're going to turn to something that is that's things that maybe marketing has used for consumer brand tests. So basically asking 1,000 people at the mall what they think of Pepsi or whatever. And that's a lot of cases, that's sort of the best we can do to measure how well we're doing with certain aspects, especially of our branding activities. But I don't think there's any perfect fit, right? Because there are so many individual contributors to the premise of brand, and how you feel about something. There are so many different inputs, and so trying to isolate, hey, did activity X have a positive or negative impact on overall brand? It's very, very hard to isolate.
Yeah, that's interesting. I was in the car with my wife's youngest son, and we were talking. For some reason, we started talking about Coke and Pepsi, and he was just being facetious, but he says Pepsi's trash. And I said, what are you talking about? I said, I love Pepsi. I like them both. He said, no. And I remembered that we did a taste test a while back, office where I used to work, just as for fun. We did the taste test.
You did the Pepsi challenge.
Yeah, we did. And I remember we had to decide, okay, which was Pepsi and which was Coke. Mm-hmm. And I was absolutely certain that that what I tasted is Coke. The Coke that I tasted was actually Pepsi, but it was Coke. And I went into that whole thing expecting, because I like Pepsi.
Yeah, you just love the underdog.
So anyways,
yeah.
But you know what occurred to me in that example that you shared just now is, okay, as a marketing outfit, I go out there and I survey existing customers and ask them what they think of my brand, right? Mm-hmm. And then based on that, you can show the results of that to leadership in the organization, and I would bet that the organizational leadership would take that information very seriously and say, well, crap, if it's bad results, well, wow, we're about to lose a bunch of customers, and that's bad news, and we're going to have to find new customers, right? Okay, well, if I'm HCM and I do that kind of a survey of my employees and they come back with some bad information, bring that to leadership, one argument would say, yeah, leadership should take that very seriously, because you have a bunch of employees that are about to leave, right? But then you might say, well, that depends on what kind of job market are we in? Can we get new employees easily? How
Yeah.
how valuable are our employees really to what we're doing, and all these sorts of things. And so it is a very different conversation.
I agree with you. I mean, the underlying idea is that uh, not to be too pessimistic or whatever, but brand perception only matters when when there's freedom of choice,
Yeah.
right? All right,
Yeah.
you can choose arbitrarily Coke or Pepsi, and in a market with sub 5% unemployment, and even lower in certain segments, your the importance of employer brand, or the focus on employer brand is only there because kind of the underlying issue is that your employees have freedom of choice. They
Mhm.
can go elsewhere. But in scenarios where there's 10% plus unemployment, then their natural predisposition to move will be a lot less, and hence the focus or the importance on employer brand will be reduced. I mean, that's pretty cold, but
Yeah.
it's the reality. It's all
Yeah.
premised on freedom of choice.
It is, and it's also, but what's interesting, it's again, it's a defaulting to the concrete sort of the general ledger, the accounting view of the organization, which is kind of interesting. And and so, and I agree with you 100% there. And so I I want to preface what I'm about to say by saying that I agree with you. So, but what's interesting is that you look at COVID-19 and the lockdowns, right? And there were a lot of layoffs, just cold hard layoffs, because we had sort of a almost a caricature expression of the accounting view of the organization, because it was real. It's what at some
Mhm.
point it's like you literally cannot afford to keep people on, right? It's not so much that you deciding that
Yeah,
you can decide that you don't have enough money to keep people on, or you can just literally not have enough money to keep people on. But at the same time, concurrently, there was a massive fixation, um, out of necessity, on improving or at least maintaining the employee experience, because there was a disruption at the same time where people were like suddenly moving into completely different types of work scenarios, logistically speaking. So that to me is interesting, right? So we had these two completely at odds things happening at the same time: layoffs on a massive scale, and a huge, um, uh, like an explosion in the focus on the employee experience.
yeah. Well, I think the two things at play there. The first, and I appreciate you agreeing with me 100% on the last statement about brand being um, really about freedom, or underpinned by freedom of choice. I think
Yeah.
I only agree with myself 90%, because there's the other
Right.
10% that plays in here is one of those situations where the analog between the brand as it affects employees and brand as it affects consumers, where that analog breaks down, and that's in higher productivity, right? Because you don't really measure that with a consumer brand, and you don't really attempt to optimize that with consumer brand or a consumer experience. Whereas employee experience efforts, not only are they there to promote employee retention, it's also how can we make current employees happier, and therefore more productive while they're still here. And so the first thing that's the first factor in the huge surge in employee experience is, I think, that right, is that it's not just about retention. It's also about productivity, and as people have to adapt to new ways of working, hey, we need to keep people as productive as possible, and not just new environments, but also new stresses. Right, this is unprecedented in terms of the amount of stress from all kinds of different vectors that is poured on us. And so, hey, what can we, how can we tackle that? Because at the end of the day, we're all people, and we care about the people that we work with, and how do we make things better for them? How do we better understand who among our employee population might be having a rougher go than others, and how do we do that? How do we do that at scale, so that we can help those people? So I think there's really a kind of a benign motivation to it, and I think the other aspect that's kind of contributing to maybe that kind of difference or dichotomy between organizations that are dealing with lots of layoffs and at the same time a huge investment in other sectors in employee experience is simply that the pandemic unemployment is never ever kind of uniformly distributed across all skills and vocations, but particularly in the pandemic, it's really polarized the unemployment rates, because you see some professions having layoffs, and hospitality stands out as one that's taken just a huge hit, whereas others are continue to be near zero unemployment. And so it's kind of figuring out how then, especially if you're an organization that might employ groups of people in both or kind of across the spectrum, how best do you meet the needs of each of those types of populations?
Yeah. I mean, you just hit a bunch of great points. One of them I want to go back to, though, is, and we are running. We should probably wrap up soon, because I think.
Yeah, I just noticed that the caller was looking. I was laughing when you said you just hit a bunch of great points, and it's like I finally hit those with 4 minutes left to go.
Well, no, I mean, we've had great points peppered across the whole time, but doing it at scale, ensuring that the employee experience is top notch at scale. That's a technology thing right there. But going back to it, looking at it sort of from the 50,000-foot view. Really, this year essentially we've seen a tacit admission that happier employees are more productive, and yet how do you measure it, other than benchmarking before and after, which doesn't work for an accounting general ledger, like an accountant's sheet. But other than benchmarking for before and after, there's really, you can't show a line that says a happier employee. I don't know of one where you can actually prove that and actually, extract that down into the balance sheet. And so that's interesting to me. But at the same time, we've tacitly admitted that. But yes, happier employees are employees that feel safe, or who feel provided for, who feel respected, will perform better.
I yeah, I think well, um, whether they call the discipline industrial psychology, which is sounds a little bit cold for some reason, or organizational behavior. I think there is yeah, there are there were a lot of studies that existed in the past um, that I think conclusively demonstrated that, and it's one of those things that makes sense in our hearts and minds, right? But I think over this past year, there's a wealth of material, to feed PhD theses
Oh yeah.
around the world, with fodder um, that this is that overall happy and more engaged workers do better work, and
Yeah.
I think it's just one of those things that we've all kind of known intrinsically, but yeah, hopefully this year we'll see a lot of concrete proof points.
Exactly. What a great place to land. Wonderful. Thanks so much, James, for joining us for HR Tech Chat. This has been really illuminating. This is super interesting stuff.
Oh, my pleasure, Brad. Thank you very much for having me.
Absolutely.